Thank you very much for having me and thanks for the introduction. So traditional training in medicine actually follows the apprenticeship model. Long training hours, learning from the master, local subjective. But the main focus of my talk is going to be assessment. How do we assess, how do we measure clinical, mostly surgical and skill and anesthesia as well? And the main things I'm going to talk about a little bit about assessment of surgical skill and talk about our own take on how assessment should be task-specific assessment of surgical skill. Then I'm going to talk about video in the operating room and focusing on one example of surgical tool pose estimation. And the last topic I'm going to cover is a bit of assessment of anesthesiology skill as well. So these are the main three topics. So obviously, when we talk about assessment, what we really want is to improve the outcomes of the patient. And this really fundamental study from a little more than 10 years ago was one of the first studies to show this and really correlated between clinical outcome and clinical treatment, technical skill and clinical outcome. So they compared videos of different surgeons, and everyone can look here for a second, which surgeon they believe does better procedure. What do you think? Who do you think is better, A or B?
I'm cheating if I talk solid.
It's A.
Yeah, so A is better. Obviously, these are probably their experience. Exam. He uses both hands. He's fluent with his motion. He does it. What his motion is actually purposeful. So the A at the beginning, you can see B was doing the same thing over and over again. And this is what they did in their study, right? They took 20 surgeons. They judged their skill. Took a panel of experts to judge their skill. And what was really fascinating about the study that we're able to correlate between clinical outcomes and technical surgical skills. And again, you know, we all talk about this surgeon has amazing hands, but the first study to actually prove that it actually means something was in 2013. And it really says that technical skill rating correlated with patient outcomes. However, this study has several issues. It's very complex. Not everyone can do such a lot. There's a reason why this reached New England Journal of Medicine. It's a very complex study. It requires expert observers, which is always limited. We don't have enough experts at have time to observe. And it's also hard to correlate to early on skills. You know, this really showed like a technical skill of experienced surgeons correlates to clinical outcome, but what about a surgical resident that's early stages only does specific skills? And what we really want to do is try to automate the process of assessment. If we're talking a little bit more in assessment or more like how to assess the more technical details or more other ways of assessment in surgery, it's checklists, using a checklist. This can be a task-specific checklist where you ask different questions. Did they do this component or didn't they do it? You can also rate it from 1 to 5. That's one approach for assessing skills, and then you can actually approach any procedure, any level of skill. And there's in surgeries, there's also global assessment, OSATs, which asks some very fundamental questions of general handling of the tissue, time and motion analysis, use of toolage. And this gives you more global assessment, like one checklist that can assess any procedure. The scores obviously will be different based on the procedure and the skill of the surgeon that you're approaching as a medical student, a resident, or experienced surgeon. But these are two different approaches for assessing skill that it can be used in any different procedure. But once again, they're subjective and they require expert observers. And we still want to try and automate these procedures. Now, if we're talking about automation of assessment, I think the first, actually a lot of the automation started actually with laparoscopic surgery. First of all, it's more complex from the technical point of view. Second of all, I think it's easier to mimic using computers. And then they started training and assessment using computers where you can follow the motion, what they're doing. Usually it's combined with some virtual reality system. This is again 20 years ago. Nowadays, Symbionics has, and different companies have like really advanced simulators of laparoscopic tools that really give you some kind of, they can follow the technical skills as well as the procedural skills. If we're talking about open surgery, which most of my talk will focus about open surgery, again, 20 years ago, we started to talk about motion analysis. So they put sensors on the hand of the trainees or wherever you wanted to exam, and you can start analyzing the motion they were doing. In this domain, we also have multiple studies. This is an example of a study I did at the time where I was in Madison. So you can see here the sensors on their hand. These are actually optic sensors, not ideal, but that's what we had at the time. And on the left, you can see the student. On the right, you can see an attending surgeon. And this is actually, this point here, so people at home can see. So what you can see is the resting time. The zero is their position of the hand at the initial position. And then the blue and the red are the distance of the hands from the starting point. And you can see obviously that the attending does it much quicker. You don't need sensors for that. But you can also see one of the fundamental metrics we can talk about, which is path lengths, how much he moved, the surgeon moves his hands. There's the amount of motion done with his hand for the surgeon is significantly less than the student. What you can also notice, and this path length is actually something you can measure, right? So a classical metric for assessing surgical skill would be asking how much motion have they been doing. Actually, this is not new to surgery. This has been done in industrial engineering for more than 100 years. But how much motion economy is a classical question nowadays that you ask if you want to try and assess automatically a technical surgical skill. So here you can see the medical student has the most amount of motion, the attending has the least amount of motion. Residents are often a tricky population if you're not careful with them, because if you put all the residents together, you get first-year residents, which are actually medical students in essence, and you get fifth-year residents, which are actually attending. And if you're not careful enough, and we're not careful enough in this study, residents usually are somewhere in the middle. Also, residents are somewhere in the trend, and for this specific skill, they're somewhere in the middle between novice and being expert, because on every specific skill is different. You can also see the difference on the tissue type they're trying to suture. So here we give them foam, balloon, and tissue paper, and you can see for tissue paper, which is much more fragile and harder to suture, the motion was much longer. So motion economy, motion path lengths, and there are other metrics that you can measure with motion. You can measure bimanual dexterity, how much the hands move together or not. You can measure the speed. Again, experienced physicians usually move faster. Their volume, their working volume is usually smaller. Their hands are more in the same place all the time, and they use both hands more. If you drill down into this procedure, you can actually see that it's combined with two distinct patterns. So here they're setting the suture. For some reason, the attending suture is automatically straight. The student is struggling. Here they're entering the tissue. Again, the attending is very confident. This tissue paper is very fragile, but the attending was very confident and entered it in one shot, while the student is very hesitant. And here they're pulling the suture out. This leads to another thing you can use, actually sensors to identify, and that's gesture recognition. So these are three different gestures that you can define. Set the suture, enter the tissue, pull the suture, then you can tie the suture. You can talk about different gestures. And these are just different gestures. As you can see, they have a unique pattern, unique signature in the sensor data. And before I'll drill into more data, I'll just show another data set that we have. It's very similar. I'll use it in several slides, so I'll give it a short introduction. Here we were using already electromagnetic sensors. You can see the black wire is just a cover on the electromagnetic sensors. They're on their hand tips. We have 25 participants, 100 videos. They have 6 gestures they're performing. And we have 3 electromagnetic sensors on each hand, so 6 totals. And we also annotated for our analysis. We annotated all the gestures that started in the tool usage, when they started and used each tool. And then in 925 frames, we also annotated the bounding box on each tool, which when I'll switch to computer vision, that will come in important. So if we go back a second and this is how the data looks, very similar to the other data set, just a slightly different angle, a new type of sensors, which are more fit for measuring surgical skill because they're not limited to line of sight. But again, so using sensor data, we can do multiple things. We can analyze their motion analysis. We can also identify automatically the gestures they're performing. Here, like a close-up on where the sensors are positioned. We can do gesture recognition using the sensor data. We can do motion analysis using sensor data. In some of our studies, we also focus on augmentation of data, so we can make the data more diverse just by playing around with it. And we have multiple studies on sensor data, but sensor data have a few limitations. First of all, they're expensive. It's not really, it takes time to set them up, to remove them, and they're not that easy to put into the operating room. And that moves us forward to actually using computer vision. I assume most of you heard deep learning, computer vision has had a revolution in the last 10 years, and things that were researched in the computer vision are practical tools that you can use. So very similar analysis to motion analysis using sensors, you can nowadays do using computer vision. So here you can see we're tracking their hands. We're tracking the tools. We even redesigned the network so we can track both the hands and the tools and combine them. So we can say which hand is holding which tool. That required making splitting the head of the network. I won't have time to get into all the technical details, but that's what you can start doing with computer vision. So the same thing we did with sensors, we can start doing computer vision. There is a limitation. We're taking a three-dimensional space and projecting it onto a two-dimensional image. But still, we can ask again questions, how much time take the procedure, how much the path length. Again, we can measure these same motion metrics that we use sensor data. We can measure them we can measure them using video data. And also we can measure even different things like the angle they're holding the tool. Because if we look at the tools, there's a bounding box on the tool. And actually the ratio of the height and width of the bounding box gives a good indication of the angle they're holding the tool. And if you look at how they're holding the forceps, you see that attending surgeons hold the forceps slightly different than the students, and more important, actually, their standard deviation, how much it goes back and forth, much more stable with attending surgeons. So they have the position they're holding all the time, and students are still going back and forth, which is something we would expect when people didn't master a specific skill. So motion analysis has been used for 20 years now for analyzing skill. It's really robust and is proven again and again to differentiate between expert and novice. And again, there are different motion metrics you can use: motion economy, working volume, dexterity. You can even analyze when they're pausing with their motion, and which usually indicates they're thinking of doing something else. And assuming the quality is assured, I mean, someone could do something much faster, but he's killing the patient. That's not very helpful. But assuming the quality is pretty much the same, motion metrics provide very valuable assessment. However, there's one issue with motion metrics. They don't really provide a path for improvement. They don't really, so you tell them to the student, you're moving too slow. What am I supposed to do with that information? I mean, okay, I can't just move faster unless I practice. So the goal of our work a lot of time is try to focus on more specific skills and more to focus on more specific feedback that will provide more informative feedback. So that can be, like, people have studied how you identify offsets automatically, which provides sometimes more specific feedback if I'm telling you you're not handling the tools right or gentle handling of tissue. We've done some work on automatic checklist detection, which also provides more specific feedback. But what we try to do a lot of our work is actually task-specific feedback, what you see in the title, and the way we do it is actually surgical proxies. Try to identify different components of surgery that indicate skill, and try to teach the computer to identify that automatically. So there's this general pipeline we use for this. First of all, you have to have a surgical procedure. You collect data from both experts and novice. The next thing is to develop these surgical proxies. You take a panel of experts, or one expert, few experts. It could be a surgeon, it could be some masters more on motion economy and motion in general. And you try to identify these specific events that are different between experts and novice, that differentiate with the learning curve of someone. Then you use computer vision and different options to identify automatically these proxies, these surgical proxies. And finally, you have to confirm, you check that you have a statistical significance between the experts and novice. And one of our examples for this is actually, before I go into the example, I'll talk about two more components of computer vision. So we spoke about object detection, which I assume at some point all of you have seen. We can also we spoke about gesture recognition. We can do that with computer vision, and we can also do hand pose. So the hand is traditionally split into 21 different markers. There are different ways to define the hand, but we use the 21 different different points on the hand. And then you can do hand pose estimation. So this, all you see here on the screen is obviously automatically done by the computer after we taught it how to do it. But we see tool detection, and we see the hand pose, all these 21 points. So that's what I said before. We labeled 925 images with the tools, the hands, and also the pose of the hands. We started with a pre-trained network that does pose estimation of the hand. Again, this was 2-3 years ago. Nowadays, actually, there are much better networks than what we did back then. So we have the hand pose, and we also have the gesture recognition. So this is a projected gesture. Right now, there are no gesture between. And this is the gesture that we identify. And here you can see down below, you can see the match between the gesture that we identified and the gesture they're doing. So this is like the basic toolbox of computer vision tools we're using for this specific study. So it's tool recognition, gesture recognition, and hand pose analysis, two-dimensional hand pose analysis in this specific study. So first of all, gesture recognition on its own provides valuable information. Because once you break down the time it takes to give different gestures, it actually provides you a lot of information. So we can see, for example, like cutting the suture is a very short task, and the experts and the novice take pretty much the same amount of time. The needle passing, actually the novice spend a lot of time, and the no gesture, which is all the handling of the suture, all the in-between, also takes the students significantly more time than the experts. And then there are other gestures that the difference, and not only time-wise different, but also percentage-wise different, is somewhere in the middle. So just using gesture recognition on its own provides actually more constructive feedback. Because now you can tell the students, first of all, you're wasting a lot of time in between, try to focus, try to see how you can do that better. And maybe you need to focus on needle passing. Maybe you just need to practice that part and not spend time and actually sutures are so expensive and not think on the tying knots, which you do fine, just focus on this specific of it. So just using gesture recognition on its own, not just one time metric, because currently the standard way you say how much time it took. It took you 10 minutes, it took you 2 minutes, but if you don't break it down to the smaller steps, you don't necessarily know on what to focus. So gesture recognition on its own provides you a way to focus better. But we can also drill down to more specific things. And again, this is the process that we took, and we did this physician, and looking at the different components and how they're holding the tools, for example. So we noticed that the experts are holding the needle drive or the forceps one way, while many of the novices are holding the forceps in a different way. This identifying the way they're holding the forceps or how they're rotating their hands and everything, proxy for measuring that is actually measuring this line of what the angle of this line. So just by measuring the angle of this hand, you can get a good proxy of how they're holding the tool. And it's more different examples for that. Now, again, we know which gestures they're doing, we know which tool they're holding because we all get that from computer vision. And now we can start drill down to specific things of telling them during this specific time of the procedure, you're not holding the tool right, you're not rotating it right, Or for example, we notice that before cutting the suture, the experts pull it a bit farther away so they have a better view, where the novice often cut the suture very close to where their hand is actually blocking their view. So we get these different components of their skill. And again, for each one of them, so there's a very same pipeline. You analyze it, you identify what you want to identify with the computer, then you use computer vision to identify that specific skill, and then you have to measure and see that it really is something that which differentiates skill, that the experts and novice actually do it differently. And in this study, we did it for 7 different proxies that we could analyze their skill, and actually this provides more specific, potentially provides more specific feedback. We've done it also with FLS training. So the FLS is a basic box trainer for laparoscopic skills. You can measure using tool detection, you can identify all the objects. So this is the most basic skill you train using the FLS, which is pick transfer. They have to take the triangles and pick them up from side to side. This is a fundamental skill just for letting them train the eye-hand motion analysis, just getting use of the tools, and they're looking in that direction, they're moving something here. And this is the task. And then you can start analyzing how they're doing it. So this is the path they should take. Again, we don't know in advance from where to where they're going to do it. This is offline. Offline, we know exactly from which peg they took it to which peg. But then we can offline analyze like what was the anticipated path. Again, there is a limitation because it's only 2-dimensional. We don't really know in 3-dimensional. But this is what we'd anticipate. This is going up, and this is taken from right to left. And then you can compare their expected and what they actually do. And you can, again, come up with more specific metrics, like how much time to transfer from one hand to another, how much they move back and forth. You can have more specific measures of their performance. Again, you always compare it between the seniors and the students. In this study, again, we had residents in the middle, and you see these metrics actually pan out as something important. And you can even develop a report card that you provide the trainee with more specific feedback on what they're doing. And this also goes with, like with FLS, we did some work on the needle angle and some other components, and open surgery suturing. You can analyze the end product of the suture, the angle and the size, just using bounding box. So this was the first part of my talk. So that specific feedback is like really analyzing and drilling down. It has the potential of giving more specific feedback, but there's much work to do. Because right now we're each time we're analyzing the test again, we need to start about talking like a standardized language, like tool handling should be more standardized and having more standard metrics, not having to deal each metric again. And if we have enough data, eventually things like anomaly detection, explainability, all of these different tools that are popular in computer vision might be able to pan out these skills more automatically than just doing it on our own. Finally, examining the impact of feedback, that's a training study, that's a completely different realm of studying of like seeing how this feedback can impact. Now, once we use video data, not just sensors, we can start enter with this video data to the operating room. And we actually installed cameras in 2 operating rooms in Israel. One is open heart surgery. So this was our initial, this is the setup. Our assumption was that the heart is pretty much in a fixed position relative to the table, and with several cameras, we can focus both on the heart as well as the room. And the sample of the data looks like this, where you can see one camera's overview of the room. The other camera helps you focus actually on the hand, so you can later on analyze motion analysis. This is a camera on the ceiling, which is focused on the heart, and then placing a camera on the head of the surgeon. That has pros and cons. It's not convenient for the surgeon. It has motion blur. But on the other hand, it's always focused on where the surgeon is actually looking. So these are the different views that we can have of the operating room in open heart surgery. But recording in the operating room is really complicated. First of all, lighting is terrible. As you can see here, actually, you get the feeling that the room is very dark. But actually, the room is very bright in the operating room. This is the brightest in the room. Then they have these lamps on the ceiling, and then he has another lamp on his head. The lighting differences in the operating room are terrible, and lighting always changes. So from a technical point of view, taking pictures in the operating room, informative and looking good. Here you can see how like it's bright where they're looking, but all the surrounding is dark. Is very complex. Space, you can't put the cameras wherever you want. It's a very dynamic environment where things move all the time and block your view. So currently we're focusing on a more specific event, and that is the removal of a blood vessel from the leg during bypass surgery. And the specific task I'm going to show you in computer vision, what's called pose estimation. So 6-degree pose estimation, what you often see is what's called segmentation. In segmentation, we take an image and we mark in the area in the image that we estimate some tool is. Right? This would look like segmentation, what you see here. This is how often you see when you see segmentation, this is what you see. But what we did here is not segmentation. What we did is what's called tool pose estimation. So we estimate the location of the tool, the XYZ estimate. So segmentation overall gives you the position of the tool in this two-dimensional plane of the image. That's segmentation. It marks each part of the tool and it gives you the two-dimensional angle. What we did here is pose estimation, which actually we estimate the position of the tool XYZ. We estimate the pitch, yaw, and roll of the tool. So actually we estimate the fixed degrees of freedom of the position in the tool. And then for visualization, we project that position back on the image. So what we're estimating here is not the segmentation of the tool, we're actually estimating the right position of the tool. And then just for visualization, we're projecting it back on the image. You can even see that we're actually, the segment you're seeing is even parts of the tool that are not visible. Right? You're seeing the tool as we believe it is, even if it's covered with its hands. This is the way we see the tool. So how do we do this? How do we do pose estimation? So one of the issues in pose estimation specifically, but in general, is data. Data is always hard to get. And if we're talking about pose estimation, especially if we're just using one camera for pose estimation, we can't really label pose estimation because I don't know in reality what is the exact pose of the tool. And in general, just every time you want to add a new tool to your data set, theoretically, you need to record more data and add that to your data set. In that recorded data, you need to label that tool and then retrain your system. So the approach we used in this study was actually using synthetic data. So first of all, we took images of the tools from multiple angles. Using these images, we can actually reconstruct the tool. So these are how the images look. And we can develop a 3D model of the tool using these images. Take a lot of images from a lot of angles and you can actually reconstruct the tool. Later on, you can add articulation to the tool. So the needle driver has just one pivoting point. It's a rigid object. And now we can generate it with different opening and closing. The forceps are a bit more complicated because when you actually close the forceps, the metal bends a bit. So using a different model, you can actually model the forceps closing if you use this model to actually use in other domains. And what you eventually can get is actually three-dimensional models of the tool. So this is synthetic data. This is not real data. This is data of the tools from different angles. You can add the coloring, you can add the shines, the middle that shines. And if we're talking about the 3D models, actually, because the middle shines, we have to put this white spray on the tool. So when we take the pictures, we're not affected by this property of the middle. And actually, we bought the official, very expensive 3D spray, and it doesn't work that well. Then I didn't know if it exists, is shampoo spray. There's something like that. $20, and it works much better. So then you build a 3D model of the tool. Next, you can take a 3D model of the hand and build a model of grasping of the tool. There's still work to do. This is not ideal grasping, but the grasping model actually took from a different off-the-shelf, like currently state-of-the-art off-the-shelf model of grasping, and you can start modeling the grasping of the tool. The next step is generating data. So we model the tool, with hands. Then take what's called HEIR maps, which are mapped to 3D space that can also allow you to add light. And then you can, again, this is all synthetic data. The background here is actually real images of places, but we are placing the tools, the synthetic data in these images, and we control all the light. So this is using a software called Blender and actually uses ray tracing. So we're actually building a 3D scenario like all the movies that we see nowadays. And we can render as many images as we want. And my student really likes to render a lot of images. So we rendered actually 80,000 images this way. And again, in these images, we know the exact position of the tool because we placed it there. So now we have actually 6 degree of freedom pose data of the tool because they're synthetic data. Now, verifying our algorithm is actually not straightforward because, again, as I told you, right now we are working. It's work in progress now to have 2 cameras, so we have actually the actual pose of the tools. But currently, the data we have is only with 1 camera. So we sat down and annotated several hundred pictures. We annotated the segmentation. So here, the annotation we did using SAM is the segmentation of the tools, the segmentation of the hands. And now we can estimate how good our model is. We don't know if actually how good right now our pose is because we're only estimated compared to segmentation. And there's a challenge because if you see in segmentation, we actually don't see the entire tool. That's why you also label the hands. So when we estimate a segmentation, we can say, okay, this is where we believe our tool is. If we want to use segmentation metrics to compare, we have to take the hand out of the image because we're going to predict the tool there, but the model of segmentation will not show it because it's not visible. And again, all the labeled data that we have here, we only use it for verification, just for checking our algorithm. There's no labeled data in the process of training and developing the model. This is the model that we use actually has 2 phases. The first phase is object detection. We use YOLO for that. And again, just placing an area of interest. Actually, the pose estimation model will not work on the full picture. It's too much information. You have to give it actually an area of interest, and then you have the pose estimation. So if we're talking about the training phase, we know exactly in our synthetic data, we know exactly where the model is because we put it there. We add some noise to the bounding books because in reality it's going to be noisy. So we add intentionally, even though we know the perfect position of the tool, we add noise. And then the next phase is the pose estimation model, which I'm not going to get into details of exactly how the model is built, but actually predicts us the name of the tool, how the articulation, how open or close it is. It provides a mask, a segmentation mask of the tool, as well as a 2D to 3D mapping of the tool. And then using this 2D, 3D mapping, you can actually estimate the position of the tool. When we're doing testing, we actually, again, in addition to training this model, we train, using this data, we train a detection model, YOLO. So when we do the testing, the inference, we take the image, we use the YOLO model to detect the tool, we give that to our pose estimation network, and we get an estimation of the pose. Now, the shift between synthetic data to real data provides a gap. And in order to overcome this gap where we're learning on synthetic data and testing it on real data, we developed this pipeline of using the system to improve itself. Actually using the system to generate pseudo labels and then let it improve itself. So what do? First of all, we have a detection model. At the first phase, the detection model and training only based on synthetic data. That's our basic training, our detection model of tool detection. When again, tool detection is getting a bounding box on the tool. The first phase of the detection model is based on only synthetic data. Then we take this model and we have unlabeled real data. We take the data we record in the operating room, some of it, a sample of it. We use the synthetic data only to generate labels, to estimate position of tools. Then we select only the good labels. What is defined good labels? We take only detections that have high confidence. And also, since it's a tool in video, we assume a tool won't just flash for one frame. So we use the detection model also has tracking in it. And only tools that are visible for at least 3 frames, we believe they are true tools, and we use them as tool for a detection model. So this helps us generate what's called pseudo labels. So we take our synthetic data only model, we take some videos from the operating room with no labels, and we develop these pseudo labels, and then we retrain our model based using these pseudo labels. So now we retrain the model to identify these pseudo labels, and we get a refined model, which improves. I'll show later on the results. It's actually improve the results. And again, this is all part of what's called domain adaptation, right? Shifting from synthetic to real world data. And now we have a detection pseudo labels and refined detection model. Now we do something very similar with our pose estimation model. So we have a pose estimation model. We train it using synthetic data only. We have now video data once again. We use our new detection model, right? The detection model was trained was developed on synthetic data, was then refined using real data, but again, no labels. We added no labels in the process. And now we have improved detection model. We use our synthetic only pose model. And again, we use it to make pseudo labels for detection. Once again, we have the criteria to choose. We only want to check this. We don't want to use all the data pseudo labels because then we'll also have bad labels. So we only take labels that have good enough confidence and some other metrics that define, okay, we believe these are good models. And once again, we put them back in the system and we refine our model. And not only that, what we found out, and actually the detection, the pose estimation also provided some bounding box. Again, once I know the pose of the tool, I know I can calculate its bounding box. And we found out that the bounding box provided by the pose estimation is actually better than the bounding box provided by the regular detection. So we use this bounding box again to refine our detection model. And we can do this process multiple times. So refining the model, and there's some point we'll stop learning, but at the beginning, it actually improves the model. And if we look at the results, so first of all, this is our detection model. If it's trained only on synthetic data, this is the results we get. Once we tune it on real data, there's a nice jump in the results. And once we retune it again based on post data, the results are even better. We're testing it based on the labels that we did in segmentation. Actually, for this model, we're testing it properly. And this is the result. Again, but in the process, there was no data that we labeled on our own. And same goes for the pose estimation. So the pose estimation, as I told you, the first phase, the pose estimation actually needs to have a bounding box. So we can check it with the ground truth bounding box just to have this component out of the image. And if we check it without the bounding box, if it's just trained on synthetic data, this is the scores we get. These are the scores we get on the top line. And if once we refine it using real data, it improves the scores. Any questions on pose estimation? And again, this is just an example of the results. Yeah.
So the pose is, the explicit pose that you predict after is derived from transforming your 3D model to fit the predicted 2D features of your tool.
Right.
So in that case, so you're just trying to predict which pixels will contain this tool? That's the,
No, we're trying to predict the actual position of the tool. Right now, since I only recorded with one camera, I don't know the real position of the tool. What we're working on right now, we have actually a system we developed with three cameras actually, and then I can use two cameras for stereo, and I can manually label and know exactly where the tool is. And then I can check my pose. I can do two things. Then I'll be able to do check my pose estimation with one camera, how good it is. And again, there is a bit of cheating here because it looks good, but the V direction is only the shrinking in the object. I might be a little bit more, I am very confident on the XY, like the up-down plane, but the depth plane, I know I'm not as accurate as I look. So once we have stereo image, we'll be able to see how accurate we are or not. And also using two cameras, we can actually get real 3D pose estimation because it's not just estimating based on depth. But right now, you're right, we're giving us, it's a bit easier because we're not really checking, but what our real goal is to know the position of the tool in 3-dimensional, because then you can use it for assessing skills, you have motion analysis, you can use it for any interactions you have. You want to have a robot interaction with the tool, you need to know where exactly it is. But yes, this depth image, which we do get, it's probably the most sensitive part because like left and right, every centimeter you move will probably translate into several pixels. Going depth and just slightly shrinking will translate. We're not going to get a meter like 3 feet off because it's going to shrink a lot, but I'm sure the error on this direction is a bit slightly higher. Yeah.
Did you use the hand pose synthetic data only for occlusion, dealing with occlusions, or did you try to train also, like using that hand pose to?
No, so I didn't show the graph. So we did 3 different trains of we did with no occlusions, with occlusions that are the hand, but not the pose. And then with the hand pose and the hand, like having the hand itself in the image is better. Again, we're also going to improve that part of like getting a more realistic hand, and actually now you'll see, now they're actually good algorithms that capture the hand pose, but I believe that algorithm that saw the hands had better chances, but because even for the YOLO, the detection part, probably finding the hands help him identify there's probably something interesting. So if you're talking about the training phase, we did actually check 3 options. Just the tool, no exclusion, that's really bad because we never see the full tool. Just removing parts of the tools, that would be the hand, but not the hand itself. And then having the hand itself, the hand improves. But we want to further improve it by modeling the hand better on the tool, because right now you saw our models are nice on the tool, they look realistic, but only semi-realistic. Okay, so the last part of my talk is going to be about anesthesia. And we have several studies of that. And a small intro. So in Israel, the board exam for anesthesiologists actually includes simulation. It's like they have a regular scenario where they come in, they see a patient, the nurse calls them to the patient, something is wrong with the patient. They usually analyze the patient. At some point, the patient deteriorates. Then they have suddenly ACLS, and then they recover. So they have the simulation. Unfortunately, they don't train enough for the simulation. The hospital is not necessarily training them. So what we did a training event for the residents before the board exam. So our training scenario is exactly identical to their board exam that they usually take a week, 2 or 3 after. These are 50-year residents, they're senior residents. But for them, it's a training event. For us, it's a data collection event. And to this extent, we already have like 160 senior anesthesiology residents participating in the study. Each one of them between 1 to 3 simulations. And this is our data collection setup and the pipeline we have. So we set it up in the hospital. Later on, we have simulation centers, and we have several camera angles that we take videos of them. We also capture the patient monitor. In addition, we put a microphone on each participant, so we can record what they're saying. And actually, I should probably share, even though it's in Hebrew, I don't know. Let's see how many people. And the first part.
ניתן עוד אדרנלין ונתחיל עיסויים.
Here is actually.
CPR.
Your CPR is even in English. So what you can see here, this is a checklist. This is a checklist that the experienced anesthesiologist judging them has to fill up while they're judging them. And what we did is actually we compared what they're saying. We automatically transcribe their saying, and we compare the text and we have several ways of comparing the text of what they're saying to what's required in the checklist. And this actually provides us, because it's the nature of the simulation, which is very verbal, because the nature of the scenario and also the simulation of people are slightly more verbal than in reality, or this is supposed to be. So this allows us to actually do activity recognition based on audio only. So again, this is what the checklist says, this is what they say, and this is a timestamp that we can automatically provide. It doesn't happen in real time, this is offline, but this is the concept. And this is the pipeline we have, which is fully automatic. It's like taking the audio, separating, even though each one has a microphone on them, still the audio sometimes overlaps. So we separate the speakers, so each channel has one speaker. We're focusing currently. So in the scenario, he's being tested, but she's part of our staff, and there's an assistant who comes in later. He's also part of our staff. He's only the one being tested. So we only analyze his speech, but we have actually the speech of all of them separated. Speech to text is nowadays pretty simple. Hebrew adds some complexity to analyzing, breaking down the words because of the structure of Hebrew. You have to remove all kind of prefix and ends of the words. It's lexical analysis. And then we have some kind of matching algorithm to actually match between the required checklist and what they're actually doing. And we check two main methods right now for this matching. So one is based on keywords, right? They say the word CPR has a meaning. We hear the word adrenaline, we probably know they're giving adrenaline. So one matching mechanism is based on keywords. So we have for each line in the checklist, we have a set of keywords that we anticipate they will say when they're reaching that step, and we match the words in that. The other method is using actually deep learning model. So BERT is a famous deep learning model. It's slightly before ChatGPT and all its trend, but it's heavy, but much lighter than ChatGPT. Aleph BERT is the Hebrew version of that. Again, we're working in Hebrew. So what we do, we refine the model so it matches a bit of the medical jargon. And then we can actually compare. So what we do, the sentence of the checklist, we embed it using this model to a vector. We have a vector that represents the sentence in the checklist. And then we have a vector for each sentence that actually said. And if we can match the vectors, we can do cosine similarity and see which vectors are very similar. And actually the vectors that, for each checklist, the vector that is most similar to the checklist usually pans out as the checklist. So we use both approaches, and we can check how good we are with activity recognition. So looking down, there are different types of activities. For example, physical exam our scores are the worst because sometimes they do the physical exam without talking about it. Theoretically, they should come to the patient and tell the patient, we're going to do this and that. Two things. First of all, this patient is a mannequin. Not all of them remember to do that. Second of all, unfortunately, even if the patient was not a mannequin, not all of them remember to do that. To introduce, in America, it's actually better than Israel. Israel, they're a bit, politeness is not our strength. We're not famous for our politeness. But other things like medication, we identify really nicely. Medical equipment they request for, we identify really nicely because they have to be verbal about these components. And we can identify it both based on keywords and as well as using a deep learning model. We can identify these steps really good. Another really interesting thing that the deep learning model actually provided was automatic assessment of readback. And I'll explain. Readback is a process where a physician asks for something specific, especially in these events. The nurse providing it is supposed to read back, say, oh, the adrenaline asks for, the physician asked for 1 milligram of adrenaline. The physician is supposed to say 1 milligram of adrenaline. I'm sorry if I'm getting the doses wrong. But that's a readback process. Now, what we notice, and again, we take all these sentences and we use this vector to embed them to a specific space, right? So we have a sentence, each sentence is represented by a vector. If we take two random sentences in the entire scenario and we match them, they're very different. The similarity is very different. They're not, it makes sense. Two random sentences are not supposed to be the same. If we take two consecutive sentences, they're actually very similar. If we're taking these readback sentences where the nurse is supposed to repeat the anesthesiologist, actually they're very similar. When we took the subsample of readbacks that were mistake, we annotated all the readbacks that was a mistake in the readback where he asked for 1 milligram of adrenaline, she said 5 milligrams or something else. We actually find this middle matching, meaning these sentences are similar. She did not say something random. He did not ask for 1 milligram of adrenaline and she provided him with a defibrillator. But they're similar, but not similar enough. And actually this showed us whether the read by mistake. And what's really nice about it, again, we did not teach the model anything specific about the process. This mismatch between the sentences provide us with that information. Another thing that we did, and that's really new, we just entered it now, is sentiment analysis. So again, I'm not an expert in sentiment analysis, but a different tool nowadays that try to analyze the sentiment based on the textual elements of our transcription or based on the speech. And what we noticed is, so we have this population of residents. Actually, so you're missing the. Okay, so this is poor. This is excellent. It's right, the excellent you can see right underneath my picture. So what you can see, so again, we have a sample of residents. They're doing their simulation, and at the end of the simulation, they get a score between 1 to 5. 1 is poor, 2, 3, 4 is okay, and 5 is excellent. And we group them into 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and 5. And by the way, unfortunately, the group of 1 and 2 is not it's not a small group. This board exam in Israel, people fail it. It's like a 60-70% pass rate. It's tricky because it's biased, because from the 30% that fail, some of them are repeatedly failing. It's not that the newcomers always fail. There's people that are not supposed to be there, let's put it that way. So that's bigger than me. But there's not it's like an easy test that only I used to hear about them, some exams here, you only have to know to English and wash your hands and you pass. This is not the exam. They actually can fail the exam. And so we have this global rating that they get. And then you get how again, I don't know enough like what is their exact sentiment, it's hard to say, what are the exact feeling, but this is like based on what they say, this is how the computer understands those feeling. And we can see that the people that are excellent are more happy and feel more trust, while the field that perform poorly feel more any issues of sadness and anger. So we see this, that something in their speech correlates to their performance. It's in the text and also in the speech. Speech means they're just the audio signal, as is not what they're actually saying, but their pitch and how they speak. And again, these same trends that the better groups are happier and more calm and neutral, whereas in the poor groups you see things like fearful and surprised. So this is a new domain for us, but it could show different things. Does it mean that will this provide an indicator with, for example, is a team under stress? And maybe I just spoke to like you could put a microphone in a room and maybe just based on this analysis, you can decide maybe we should call someone else to the room because something is happening, or the other way around. Maybe it indicates just like how the judges perceive it is a lot based on what they project, and also how will that how you sound and what you project, how will that help you lead the team? It's a new study for us, and it's a new component of the same study, and I'm still trying to figure out where this will take us. Just like in surgery, in anesthesiology, we'll also enter the operating room and started recording them in the operating room. We have several cameras. We're focusing mainly on 3 areas. One is several cameras on the medication cart, so we can automatically track what medication they're preparing and how they're preparing it. We have one overview camera of the room that sees how they're walking around in the room, but it cuts out the patient. And then we also installed several cameras on the patient monitor and some on the monitor of the respiration machine to see when they're observing the monitor. Just like when you're in Zoom, if you're looking at the camera, we can see it. If you're looking sideways, we can see your face when we see you're not looking at the camera. Using this camera, we're trying to observe and follow how often they're observing the patient monitor. This is how the data looks. So again, these are different top views of the medication cart. This is a side view that provides us a view of the room. And this is the view that we see from the different monitors in the room that we can use this view to analyze when they're observing the monitor. Again, observing the monitor that we define actually on focus and out of focus. On focus is again this person, it's hard to see with the lighting here, but this person actually looking at the monitor, so we cannot just see his face, we see that his face is looking at the monitor. This person is looking sideways. So we have the first layer of the algorithm is just using YOLO, again, famous YOLO to identify faces. That is there's out of the box algorithms for detection of faces. We then added another layer of training to identify the faces looking at the monitor or looking sideways. And then we can start analyzing when this anesthesiologist is looking at the monitor, and the second is going to turn green. And that's exactly when they observe the monitor. So we can map automatically how frequently and when And if maybe later on, if they didn't observe the monitor for 10 minutes, we can maybe provide some kind of alert. You might want to lift up your head. We want to analyze, actually, patient monitor as also provide sound. You know, the anesthesiologist has sound feedback to the heart rate and forgot the name, oxygen, exactly. So we can analyze like what is the relationship between what he hears and when he decides to lift up his head and look. All these different sides, these tools will let us drill down to more specific skills of an anesthesiologist. And generally speaking, we're focusing on different things when we're talking about anesthesiologists, like where in the room they're walking around, we can see where they're spending their time. There are different algorithms nowadays to estimate what they're observing, what they're looking at. We can do hand tracking. It's easier to see at the beginning. Again, this is, I told you the pose estimation we used 3 years ago is a bit old. Nowadays, pose estimation really gives nice 3D pose estimation of the hand. I like to call this Mickey Mouse hand because it really, more than the algorithm, I love the glove they put on the hand. So we can analyze the pose estimation, and we can analyze also where they're observing, when are they observing the monitor and when not. And we're soon going to start analyzing also when they're injecting drugs to try to see what drugs they're injecting and in parallel to that, we're getting the patient monitor video. Yeah.
How long does it take to generate these like pose superimpositions?
From a computer point of view,
Like, yeah, how long does it take to process it through this pipeline after the model has been trained?
first of all, I would need to ask my students, but from what I remember, unfortunately, I don't have time to write code nowadays. It's really sad, but I miss it. But yeah, from these algorithms specifically are not too bad. The pose estimation before it's not real time. I don't know if they're like 30 frames per second, but they're not extremely heavy. I mean, this is real time. This
Yeah.
runs at 30 because this we developed all. I mean, YOLO is very fast, and the Technion interface on those fast. I'll have to ask about the rest. I think they're not extremely slow. I don't know if they're like 30 frames per second.
So it's like within seconds in delay, or is it like?
Right,
minutes or
we're not,
hours?
our pipeline is not, we don't try to do anything real time right
Okay.
now. That's not a focus. We're still like collecting data and analyzing it. Actually, the pipeline of getting the data out of the operating room it takes time.
Mhm.
Just like, computers goes up and down with what is a bottleneck, like
Yeah.
used to be, if you remember, like text images, you were limited to how many you should share. Video still takes the computers to the limit, even just
Yeah,
getting 5 streams of data recording on your hard drive.
yeah.
If it's not an SSD drive, it's not gonna be real time. It's gonna
Yeah.
take. But so currently, we're not doing anything real time. It's not our goal.
Yeah, what's the order of magnitude? Is it like hours, days?
What, to analyze one video?
Yeah, one video.
No, I think it's hour. I mean, our video would be maybe hours of analysis.
Okay.
But not all these metrics, we know exactly what to do. But actually in anesthesiology, we used to say, okay, so I have 2 students working. One is finishing his PG now, he's an engineer, and the other one is a anesthesiology resident who's doing his PG. But the engineer did all of the metrics, and then I asked him a question, okay, what does it mean? We don't know yet. Because like, what does it mean if he's walking around in the room? What does it mean? Like, anesthesiology is actually, from my feeling, I don't know, people in the crowd might have different, but actually surgeons have more analysis of their work in the operating. Anesthesiologists actually in simulated environment are more advanced because the mannequins give a realistic scenario. And the operating room, I don't know enough what defines good. It's hard, like planning, how do you measure planning? Doesn't matter how quickly they move their hands. Surgeons, it's important. I'm not sure if motion analysis of the hand. I love the images because of this nice hands. I'm not sure exactly what it means. What medication they're preparing and the order, I think that I know what it means, but that we're still really like, we have, I didn't show here, but like identifying the syringes and the other stuff. So if I just want to summarize, like deep learning and computer vision in the operating rooms and natural language processing, like really open a new horizon. Cameras in the operating room can provide continuous feedback. You can actually check the residents as they go and see how they progress. And eventually they have many other applications in robotic and automatic workflow analysis that they may provide. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
I know we've been kind of taking questions as we go, but does anybody else have any additional questions? This is awesome, Shlomi. Thank you very much, and especially because, well, Edward's gonna be working on some of that trauma-based stuff that we've talked about. So, because all of my stuff has always been inside the body, like looking at the laparoscopic view, the robotic view, and I've done very little like sort of real analysis. And so it's really amazing just to see like how sophisticated that's gotten versus what I was first exposed to when I was in Imperial like 13, 14 years ago. I saw you showed the ICSAT. I have like PTSD because I used that in my master's when I was at Darcy. Yeah, it's very, very cool to see how this has evolved, and especially the pose estimation piece. Because I think like for us, at least we traditionally just focused on segmentation and have not done as much post segmentation. But seeing how you've been able to incorporate that to really better understand the surgical scene gives me a lot of ideas that we can talk about later. I think, I know actually you had the attention of Deb Coder, the chair of anesthesia, was logged in briefly, and caught some of the anesthesia part, so I'm sure she's probably got you some questions over too, so I'll get you that stuff. So I don't know if anybody else online, I don't even know if they can hear me, but feel free to send something in the chat, but otherwise I think we're coming up on a minute here. All right, I guess that's it.